The air in the Mercy General Emergency Department was a thick cocktail of antiseptic, iron-rich blood, and the cloying sweetness of human fear. It was a constant, a miasma that clung to the scrubs and seeped into the pores of those who called its chaotic corridors their place of work. Tonight, the usual hum of controlled crisis had escalated to a roar. A multi-vehicle pile-up on the interstate during a sudden downpour had turned the trauma bay into a tableau of organized mayhem. Machines beeped a frantic, discordant symphony, voices rose in sharp, clipped commands, and the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum was a constant, panicked rhythm. Amidst it all, Nurse Alara Vance moved with an unnatural calm. A small, quiet island in a raging sea, her hands, covered in pale blue nitrile gloves, were a blur of efficiency as she triaged. Her movements economical and precise. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She assessed a patient with a fractured femur, applied a splint, and directed the orderlies with a low, steady voice before moving to the next gurney, her eyes already cataloging the severity of the new wounds. She was a fixture on the night shift, a woman who seemed to have been carved from the same stoic, weary material as the hospital's old brick foundations. Her hair, a practical shade of brown, was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face, though not unkind, was a mask of professional detachment. She was older than many of the residents who barked orders at her, her presence a quiet counterpoint to their youthful, textbook-driven anxiety. Few knew much about her beyond her name and her unnerving competence. She kept to herself, ate her meals alone in the break room, and never spoke of a life outside these walls. Her most defining features were the things she tried to hide. A complex web of silvery, tissue-thin scars crisscrossed her forearms, extending from her wrists to her elbows. When a young, curious intern had once asked about them, Alara had looked down at her own skin as if noticing it for the first time. Her expression flat. "Grease fire," she had said. The words clipped and final, a clear dismissal of any further inquiry. Then there was the limp. A subtle hitch in her left gait that became more pronounced at the end of a 12-hour shift when exhaustion wore down her careful control. She favored the leg, shifting her weight with an unconscious grace that spoke of long acquaintance with pain. These small imperfections were her cover, the mundane explanations that grounded her in the ordinary world. They were the static that obscured the truth, the subtle camouflage that allowed a predator to sleep amongst the herd. But sometimes, in moments of extreme pressure, the camouflage would slip. A police officer was wheeled in, a gunshot wound to the abdomen, his partner frantic and shouting. Alara took control of the scene not by raising her voice, but by lowering it. Her calm focus cut through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel. As she worked to staunch the bleeding, her gaze flickered to the partner's sidearm, a Glock 19. Her eyes registered the make, the state of the slide, the way the officer's finger rested dangerously close to the trigger guard. It was an assessment made in a fraction of a second, an ingrained tactical analysis that had no place in a nurse's skill set. Later, as the rain hammered against the bay windows, the distinctive percussive chop of a helicopter's rotors sliced through the storm. A resident glanced up, annoyed, another damned news chopper. Alara didn't even look. "A 60, she murmured, almost to herself. "Military transport, not news." The resident stared at her, baffled by the certainty in her voice. She had identified it by sound alone, the way a sommelier identifies a vintage by its scent. She was a woman of ghosts and echoes, her past a locked room to which no one in this hospital had a key. The chaos of the pileup was beginning to subside. The most critical patients had been stabilized or moved to surgery, and a semblance of order was returning. It was then that Dr. Alistair Finch, head of emergency medicine, swept onto the floor. He was not a man who walked, he glided, propelled by an aura of self-importance and the scent of expensive cologne. He wore a tailored suit, not scrubs, a stark, pristine statement that he was above the grime and viscera of his own department. He hadn't come to help. He had come because the son of a prominent city councilman, a major hospital donor, had been forced to wait 45 minutes for an X-ray on a sprained ankle. Finch's face was a thundercloud of indignation, his eyes scanning the weary staff for a target, a receptacle for his manufactured outrage. His gaze landed on Alara Vance. She was perfect, quiet, older, a long-serving nurse who wouldn't dare talk back. She was in the process of logging patient vitals into a terminal, her back partially to him. "Nurse Vance," he snapped. The name cracked like a whip in the relative quiet. Alara finished her entry before turning slowly to face him. Her expression was neutral, betraying nothing. "Yes, Dr. Finch?" she asked, her voice even. He strode toward her, his polished Italian shoes clicking on the floor. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to look up at him. "I have just spent 20 minutes apologizing to Councilman Bright because his son was treated like common refuse in my ER," he began, his voice rising with theatrical fury. "And while reviewing the logs, I see a glaring procedural failure. You administered a tetanus shot to the patient in Trauma 3 without a signed consent form on file." He pointed a manicured finger at her. "That is a direct violation of protocol." A lawsuit waiting to happen. A junior nurse nearby winced. The patient in Trauma 3 had been unconscious, a Jane Doe with a deep, contaminated laceration. Administering tetanus was standard, life-saving procedure in such cases. It was a textbook application of implied consent. Finch knew this. It was a pretext. Alara's gaze did not waver. "The patient was unconscious and unidentified, doctor. It was a clinical necessity." Her tone was factual, devoid of emotion or apology. This placid response only seemed to fuel Finch's rage. He saw her calmness not as professionalism, but as insolence. "I do not need you to lecture me on clinical necessities in my own department," he spat, his voice now a shrill bark that turned heads across the ER. "I need my staff to follow the rules. The rules that protect this hospital from financial ruin. The rules that protect me." He took a step closer, invading her personal space, his face contorted in a sneer. He looked down at her feet, at the slight off-kilter way she stood. "Perhaps the pace here is finally getting to be too much for you. This department is a high-performance machine, Nurse Vance. We can't afford to be carrying slow, outdated parts." The insult was brutally personal, a direct attack on her age and her hidden injury. The air crackled with tension. The entire ER staff was now watching, frozen in a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Alara stood her ground, a statue of composure. Her silence was a vacuum, and Finch, a man who abhorred a vacuum, rushed to fill it with more venom. He jabbed his finger toward the main entrance. "I want you out. Now, collect your things. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Get out of my ER." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Alara did not flinch, she did not argue, she did not cry. Her face remained an impassive mask, but something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of an ancient, banked fire deep within. She simply held his gaze for a long, unnerving moment before giving a single, sharp nod. She turned without another word and walked toward the staff locker room, her limp seeming more pronounced under the weight of 100 staring eyes. Dr. Finch stood triumphant, puffing out his chest as he surveyed his domain, convinced he had just made a vital display of authority. He had pruned a weak branch, asserted his dominance. He had no idea he had just tried to fell a giant redwood with a pocket knife. Alara was halfway to the lockers, the public humiliation a cold, hard knot in her stomach, when a new kind of chaos erupted. The bay doors burst open with a crash, and paramedics wheeled in a gurney at a dead run. On it lay a man in torn, tactical gear, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. He was conscious, his eyes wide and alert despite the pain, scanning the room with a soldier's practiced gaze. He was Sergeant Marcus Thorne. Flanking him were two grim-faced men in dark suits, their hands inside their jackets, their earpieces stark against their necks. Federal agents. Simultaneously, the lights in the ER flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into the eerie half-light of the emergency backup system. A collective gasp swept the floor. The main doors slid shut with a heavy final thud and refused to open. The digital lock display went dark. Communications were dead. The hospital was a sealed box. A cold dread, far more potent than the panic from the car crash, began to settle over the room. This was not a power failure. This was deliberate. This was an attack. Finch, his face pale with sudden fear, fumbled for his phone, his earlier arrogance melting into whimpering confusion. The federal agents drew their weapons, forming a protective circle around Thorne's gurney. From the far end of the corridor, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was dressed in the uniform of a hospital security guard, but he moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly at odds with the role. He raised a handgun fitted with a suppressor. The first soft cough of the weapon was followed by the shattering of a glass partition. One of the agents cried out and fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a crawl for Alara. She saw everything. She saw the second agent returning fire, his shots going wide in the poor light. She saw the attacker, whom she would later know as Kestrel, moving to a new position of cover with practiced ease. She saw the terrified faces of her colleagues huddled behind desks and overturned carts. She saw Dr. Finch, frozen like a statue, his mouth agape in silent, useless terror. And she saw Sergeant Thorne on the gurney, trying to reach for a weapon that wasn't there, his face a mask of fury and frustration. In that frozen moment, the nurse died. The years of carefully constructed normalcy, the quiet life she had tried to build from the ashes of her old one, all of it burned away. The mask didn't just drop, it shattered. Her posture straightened, the weariness vanishing from her shoulders. Her head came up, her chin set. Her eyes, once placid and observant, narrowed into chips of cold, analytical steel. The hidden wolf was awake. She moved. It was not the hurried scramble of a civilian caught in a crossfire. It was a purposeful, violent explosion of motion. Her first target was a heavy, stainless steel IV pole standing beside a vacant bed. Her hand closed around its shaft. In one fluid movement, she spun, the pole whistling through the air. Kestrel, the lead mercenary, was focused on the remaining federal agent. He never saw her coming. The weighted base of the pole connected with his wrist with a sickening crack of bone. His suppressed pistol clattered to the floor. Before he could even register the pain, Alara reversed her grip and brought the pole around in a brutal, horizontal arc that slammed into his temple. He dropped like a stone, unconscious, before he hit the ground. She didn't pause to check her work. She scooped up his pistol, her hands moving with an instinctive familiarity that was terrifying to behold. She checked the magazine, cleared a potential jam, and chambered a round in less than a second. The weapon felt like an extension of her own body. Her voice, when she spoke, was unrecognizable. It was not the soft-spoken nurse's murmur. It was a low, resonant command tone that cut through the fear and confusion like a diamond blade. "You." She barked at the remaining, stunned federal agent. "Door. Barricade it now. Use the supply cabinets." She then turned her attention to the wounded soldier on the gurney. "Thorne. Status." The man's eyes widened in disbelief, recognizing the cadence of a fellow operator. "Multiple GSWs, torso and leg, still combat effective," he grunted, the words forced through clenched teeth. "Good," Alara snapped. "Keep your head down and call out targets. They'll come from the east and west corridors." She moved with impossible speed, kicking a supply cart on its side to create a piece of cover, her movements precise and economical. She was no longer just a participant in the chaos, she was conducting it, turning the environment into a weapon. The audience of disbelief was total. Her colleagues, the very people she had worked beside for years, stared as if she had sprouted wings. The quiet, limping nurse who couldn't handle the pace of the ER was now orchestrating a defense against a team of trained killers. Dr. Finch, still frozen in the same spot, could only stare, his mind utterly unable to process the transformation. The woman he had publicly humiliated and fired, the outdated part he had so casually discarded, was now the only thing standing between them and certain death. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been inverted, shattered, and remade with Alara at its absolute center. Two more mercenaries, alerted by the cessation of Kestrel's fire, appeared at the end of the east corridor. They moved in a practiced, stacked formation, weapons up. Alara was ready. She didn't fire from her position. Instead, she used the polished linoleum floor to her advantage, spotting their reflection before they rounded the corner. "East corridor, 2 hostiles, 20 meters," she said, her voice a low growl. Thorne, from his gurney, confirmed, "I see them." Alara fired 2 shots. Double taps. The sound was still muffled by the suppressor, but the impact was devastating. The lead mercenary crumpled, a neat hole appearing in his chest. The second one dove for cover, returning fire wildly. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the steel cart Alara was using. She remained preternaturally calm, tracking his movements, waiting for her opening. "He's reloading," Thorne yelled. That was all she needed. Alara burst from cover, not away from the threat, but toward it. She closed the distance in a blur, firing as she moved. The mercenary looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, just as 2 rounds struck him center mass. He fell backward, his weapon skittering away across the floor. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Alara knew it wasn't over. A professional team would have more assets. They would have a plan B. She quickly scavenged ammunition and a radio from the fallen men, her hands working with grim efficiency. She handed a spare pistol to the federal agent, who looked at her with a new, profound respect. "Watch the west corridor. Fire only on my command," she ordered. She then knelt beside Thorne, her hands now a nurse's again, but with a terrifying new context. She ripped open his tactical vest, assessing his wounds with the same cold precision she had used to assess the enemy. "The vest stopped the torso shots, but you've got a femoral bleed. We need to stop it now, or you're done." Her fingers found the artery, applying precise, brutal pressure. Thorne gasped in pain, but nodded, his trust in her absolute. It was in this moment of tense quiet, the air thick with the smell of cordite and blood, that a new sound began to permeate the sealed-off ER. It was a deep, rhythmic whump-whump-whump that grew steadily louder, vibrating through the very structure of the building. It was the sound of heavy helicopters, more than one, holding a position directly over the hospital. Then came a series of loud, percussive bangs from the main entrance. Not gunfire, breaching charges. With a final, deafening explosion, the main ER doors, the ones the mercenaries had sealed, were blown inward off their tracks, crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Silhouetted against the flashing red and blue lights from outside stood a wall of men. They were giants, clad in black tactical gear, night vision goggles flipped up on their helmets, rifles held at the ready. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized efficiency of a Tier 1 unit. A SEAL team. They flooded the room, securing every corner, their laser sights cutting through the dim light, their shouted commands of clear, echoing in the suddenly silent space. They parted, creating a path. Through the smoke and the chaos walked a man who commanded authority as if it were a force of nature. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles. He wore the immaculate dress-white uniform of a United States Navy Rear Admiral, his chest a dazzling constellation of ribbons and medals. He ignored the cowering staff, the dead mercenaries, the terrified Dr. Finch. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept the room, taking in the entire scene in a single, comprehensive glance. He saw the makeshift barricades, the neutralized hostiles, and finally, he saw Alara. She was still kneeling beside Sergeant Thorne, her hands covered in his blood, the captured pistol resting on the floor beside her. She looked up, her face streaked with grime, her eyes weary but unbroken. The Admiral, Declan Hayes, began to walk toward her. His steps were measured, deliberate, each one echoing in the profound silence. He walked across the debris-strewn floor and stopped 3 feet in front of her. He did not speak. He simply stood there, his powerful presence filling the room. Then, slowly, with a precision that bespoke a lifetime of discipline, he raised his right hand to his temple in a crisp, perfect salute. He held it there, his gaze locked on the quiet nurse, a silent, profound testament of respect that was more powerful than any speech. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Alara, still on one knee, slowly took her bloody hands from Thorne's wound. With a visible effort, she rose to her feet. The limp was back, more pronounced than ever. She did not return the salute with a military gesture, she was a civilian now, but she met his gaze and gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. It was a gesture between warriors, an understanding that transcended rank and uniform. It was at this moment that Dr. Finch, seeing a new, more powerful authority figure, decided to reassert himself. He scrambled to his feet, brushing dust from his ruined suit, his face a mask of frantic, desperate indignation. "Admiral, thank God you're here." He stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. "This woman, this nurse, she's unhinged. She attacked these men. She has a weapon. She needs to be arrested." Admiral Hayes did not even turn his head. His salute dropped, but his icy gaze remained fixed on Alara. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying resonance, a low-frequency rumble that seemed to vibrate in the bones. "Doctor," he said, the word dripping with contempt, "you will be silent." Finch stopped, his mouth hanging open. The Admiral turned his head slowly, pinning Finch with a look of such utter disdain that the man physically recoiled. "You are addressing Master Chief Special Warfare Operator Alara Vance, retired," the Admiral's voice boomed, each word a hammer blow of revelation. "United States Navy SEALs, recipient of the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Bronze Stars with Valor designation. The woman you so carelessly dismissed is a living legend in the Special Operations community. We called her Spectre because she was the last thing our enemies ever saw." The ER staff gasped. Jaws dropped. A collective wave of shock and awe washed over the room. The Admiral took a step toward Finch, who shrank back. "This unhinged nurse is the sole survivor of Operation Nightfall. Her team was ambushed, overwhelmed by a force 10 times their size. For 72 hours, wounded and alone, she held their position, protecting a high-value intelligence asset, and eliminated over 50 enemy combatants before reinforcements could arrive. She saved a mission that would alter the course of the war in that region." He gestured toward Alara's scarred forearms. "You see those scars? They're not from a kitchen accident. That is shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade. The same grenade that killed her entire fire team right in front of her. Her limp," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "is the result of a 5-story fall from a rooftop during an exfiltration in Kandahar, a fall she took to shield a wounded teammate from the impact." The grand exposition hung in the air, each detail reframing the quiet woman they thought they knew into a figure of almost mythic heroism. The scars and the limp were not marks of weakness or clumsiness. They were medals of honor, paid for in blood and sacrifice. The Admiral's gaze turned arctic as it settled once more on the trembling Dr. Finch. Sergeant Thorne, the man she just saved, is a key federal witness in a national security case. The men she neutralized were sent to silence him. Your breathtaking arrogance, your public humiliation of a national hero, and your complete failure to recognize the threat to your own hospital nearly cost this country a vital asset. Your career, Doctor, is the least of your concerns. Your professional life is over. Federal agents will be conducting your debriefing, and I suspect they will have many questions about your security protocols and your monumental lapse in judgment. You are a disgrace to your profession and an insult to the heroes who walk among you." Finch made a small, strangled sound and seemed to collapse in on himself, his face ashen. He was no longer a man of authority, he was just a small, pathetic figure, utterly and publicly ruined. A profound silence followed the Admiral's speech. It was broken by a single, distinct sound. One of the conscious federal agents, his arm in a makeshift sling, began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Then another joined in, one of the SWAT officers. Soon, the entire room, the nurses, the doctors who had stood by, the orderlies, the patients, the cops, erupted in a thunderous, rolling wave of applause. It was a sound of awe, of respect, of profound apology. They were not clapping for a nurse. They were clapping for a warrior, a hero who had hidden in plain sight, bearing the weight of an invisible war. Alara stood through it all, her face betraying no emotion, but her eyes glistened with a moisture she refused to let fall. She had not sought this, she had only wanted peace. Admiral Hayes walked to her side and placed a heavy, gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Master Chief," he said softly, his voice for her alone. "We've been looking for you for a long time. It's time to come home." Alara looked around the emergency room, at the chaos she had both survived and created. She saw the faces of her colleagues, now looking at her with a reverence that felt more alienating than their previous indifference. This place, this life she had tried to build, was now another casualty, another ghost. There was no going back. She gave a final, weary nod. The Admiral signaled to his men. The SEAL team, who had stood like sentinels, moved to form an honor guard, creating a clear path to the blown-out doors. As Alara walked, flanked by the Admiral, she did not look back. She left behind the beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic, and the shattered career of a man who had judged a book by its cover and paid the ultimate price. She walked out of the ER and back into the world she had tried so desperately to leave behind, her quiet dignity her only shield. As the emergency lights bathed the scene in a pulsing rhythmic glow, the lesson was etched into the memory of every person who remained. Heroes are not always clad in capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear scrubs. They walk with a limp, and they carry scars not of accident, but of sacrifice. They are the quiet ones, the underestimated, the overlooked, moving through the world with the ghosts of their past battles trailing silently behind them. They seek not glory or recognition, but a small measure of the peace they fought so hard to secure for others. And it is a fool's errand to mistake their silence for weakness, or their stillness for surrender. For deep within the heart of the quietest soul may beat the heart of a wolf, waiting for the one moment it is called upon to protect the flock.